Mainly one of the things that I've really been talking to our customers about. Well, I guess first I'll tell you about Vandus, just so you know who we are. Vandus is a systems and network integrator based out of New York. We cover from Buffalo all the way down to Long Island and kind of everything in between. I'm the CTO at Vandus. I've been here for about 11 years. And I spend most of my time on the road speaking with customers about their struggles around networking, cybersecurity, hybrid cloud, and really bringing... No. You want me to move closer? Can you guys hear me? All right. Bringing all of that together into one kind of cohesive fabric. So, I always like to reference the story because I think it's a pretty good jumping off point for what this topic's about, right? So, a networking vendor a couple years ago released a very cool switch. And part of this switch was this whole API layer where you could integrate automations. So I'm talking with the customer about like why it's important and what it can do. He says, yeah, that's great, but I don't have the team to write to the API, so I'm never going to use that functionality. Everyone talks to me about APIs, but it doesn't make a difference. And that hit home. So I've really spent the last couple of years helping customers kind of figure out the pathway to get all of their disparate platforms to start talking to each other, but also so has Gartner, and that's kind of what we're going to get into. I'm going to skip me. So I've been in the industry for a while. My focus is really around networking, security, hybrid networking, the cloud, and everything in between. All right. So, getting into the actual slides. So, I guess the last 4 years for all of us have been kind of fast and sometimes a little loose. Mainly because COVID came along. There was a lot that happened to enable work from home. But cyber threats became larger than they've ever been, and they continue to grow. I mean, we were trending that way beforehand, but a lot of holes were poked and a lot of infrastructure to support work from home, and that increased our risk considerably. One of the biggest problems that, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of organizations have is siloing, as well, both from a employment standpoint, right? So the network team being siloed from the security team being siloed from the risk team. That siloing has to be broken down across our industry, and everyone needs to start collaborating more. But siloing in technology as well. So the biggest problem with siloing in technology is when we go and we sit down with our customers and kind of go through everything that exists in their environment today, the biggest problem that we're finding is they have a ton of the tools they already need. Sometimes they have the tools in triplicate because each department's buying something that does the same thing and no one's integrating it together. So one of the most important things that, as an industry and as a group we need to start doing is looking at every acquisition we make. How is it integrating with the technology stack we already have, and how is it going to be monitored, affected, and reported on? So these are just I just changed this earlier today. This is kind of a recurring deck that comes around, but looking at the landscape today. So number 2 is a big one that the casino breach the other day. One of the biggest things that came from the incident response kind of write-ups was these guys did a really good job of hanging around doing long-term reconnaissance once they got in and cleaning up their footprints. So even determining their depth and breadth of incursion was difficult because they had already cleaned up the cookie crumbs. Social engineering and email, sorry, I gotta get rid of this thing. I'm like sucking on a mint and it's driving me crazy. Social engineering and email are leading the way in terms of the primary point of breaches, and a lot of that has to do with poor training, but also poor visibility, poorly configured monitoring reporting tools, and overall just, sorry. This is not my best one. I'm struggling today, I don't know why. All right, so let's get to where we're all going with this. So there's been the great acquisition that's been occurring over the last couple of years, where vendors are looking to purchase and kind of fill out their entire portfolio, right? So no one's looking anymore at just being a networking company because it doesn't actually work from a standpoint of the standpoint of managing an ecosystem. Everyone was in a point product acquisition phase, and the point products are really difficult to manage. People aren't logging into them. People aren't actually staying up with them. So there's a lot of configuration decay that's happening because people aren't staying on top of it. So, Gartner announced their cybersecurity mesh architecture, like 2 years ago? And what we've seen is we're seeing all the major players in that acquisition phase now, right? So you have Cisco buying up a ton of cloud governance space, as well as Splunk. You have Fortinet making similar acquisitions. You have Aruba picking up Axis, as well as a private 5G environment. So they're all working to essentially complete the entire portfolio. And why that's important for all of us is that gets us towards a single pane of glass. So there are ways, obviously, to do a full integration across your IT stack using point products, but it's a lot harder. Whereas if you're going with a single vendor approach, the hope, and we'll see how everyone does in integrating all their acquisitions, the hope is that you go to a single pane of glass that gives you reporting across your entire stack. The other area that's really also driving the cybersecurity mesh architecture is IT budgets, not only from a capital standpoint, but also a staffing standpoint, as you all know. We lost headcount in our industry in 2008. We lost it again in 2012. And then during COVID, we saw an even greater reduction. And what we're not seeing is that headcount come back. We've seen the headcount come offshore, but we've also seen the headcount offshore prove to not really be able to help from an expert, subject matter expert standpoint. So we're left focusing more on as-a-service platforms or going to these full stack architectures. So, the important thing about all of these, and they're all getting there, along their same level. They all have some kind of term for it, whether it be, a fabric, a control plane, an orchestrator. But the important thing is all of these platforms need to have open fabrics to communicate with each other, whether it be through third-party integrated APIs where the firewall vendors and the network access control vendors and the switching vendors are all actually integrating it together, or it needs to rely in some kind of proprietary control protocol, which falls into that mesh architecture. So the other big thing is visibility and reporting. One of the things that I've seen in a lot of my customers and a lot of my peers have seen is a tendency to take your network monitoring platforms, your SIEM, toss everything at it, and no one's actually really managing that data or working through that data. So there are a couple ways that can be remediated, but what's amazing is when you get into one of these incidents with a customer, this happened to me last week, where we started working with the customer, and the customer said, I'm sure we're logging it somewhere. And we had to start hopping through essentially log collector after log collector until we were able to pull this thing out. When honestly, a well-curated SIEM or network management platform would have been able to give us what we needed very quickly, but instead it was kind of going through backups to find what we needed in terms of where the configuration was for what syslogger this was all going to. So, it really goes towards, the first step of all of this. I mean, look, there's some of this is kind of, can be seen as a pipe dream in terms of how integrated you really have to be, but it all starts with policy and control. So, talking about the cybersecurity mesh architecture, and I don't even know if he's in here. One of my old coworkers and I came up with a concept a while ago that's called 047. So the blue on the left side is all what we consider layer 0. It's your identity. It's your authentication. The upper right, your network, is the 4 section, and obviously application security is 7. So to really have, when you start looking at cloud networking, perimeter security, SD-WAN, when you start to integrate all of those, yeah, they can all be configured to allow traffic or allow sessions and handle transit. But until you start to actually integrate these 3 circles together in a cohesive manner where they're all communicating with each other, you're not able to actually secure your environment, right? You might be securing one portion of it, but when you start to look at, I'm going to come down to the side here. When you start to look at integrating your network access control with your remote access, and tying in your MFA into all of this, and while also feeding all of this context up to your next generation firewalls, that really gives you the ability to start to secure and lock down your network, but also come up with a cohesive network monitoring and security monitoring topology. Because one of the things that we've really discovered is the policies aren't the same in all of these. So you really have to standardize your policies on both your public cloud environment, your private cloud environment, your firewalls, your wireless, your switching. As long as all of that is the same user experience in each area, and you replicate the access control through policy and written policy, saying like, all right, this department is going to be able to access this resource. You're essentially doing that segmentation at every level of your network, and it's unified. What we see way too often is you have different levels of access depending on where you are in the network, or your campus. So when you're working at your desk, you might have unrestricted access to the entire environment. But when you're working from home through a ZTNA platform, you only have access to 3 of your actual layer 7 applications. So really coming up with a unified strategy of handling all of these, and really following a model of zero trust, both on network and off network, you're in a much better place. Now, let's see, did I have it in here? I did. So bullet point number 3, I just went backwards for a second, but bullet point number 3, I can't tell you how many customers we talk to who their response is, we're only worried about the outside. I'm actually underreporting bullet point number 3's number. This is a number I pulled from the Verizon 2023 breach report. But more than 10% of the breaches in the United States this year were from internal threat actors. In some sectors, like financial, public administration, public sector, it's actually higher. It's 30%. So the concept that my coworker is my friend and can be trusted is something we all need to get away from, and really truly start to deal with our applications and our information as things that we have to treat everyone as untrusted, even ourselves, even our endpoints and computers, because it's It's becoming a pretty tough world to protect against. So we have to stop creating caveats that create holes. So how does Vandus help with this? Like how have we tackled this approach with our customers? So we start with those environments I was talking about a short time ago, right? So it starts with the data center. We look at the branch. We look at your cloud environment. We look at your work from home. We look at all your different working areas, right? And start to figure out what your policies look like, what you have in place, to make sure that we're unifying the experience for the end user, as well as for the teams that need to monitor, troubleshoot, and protect all of that infrastructure. And that's really the big thing, right? You get into large environments where these four areas don't match, and you have service technicians who have runbook after runbook after runbook, and it really depends on where the end user is calling from that the runbook is different. Well, that's where you get into trouble with places like the casino in Vegas. That was a call into a help desk, and the help desk ran a runbook, gave access to essentially a threat actor who was able to compromise the SMS of an end user, get access, and work their way through. But a lot of that came from complicated process, complicated procedure, too many runbooks. So really coming down with a unified user experience across the board helps you actually unify everything across the entire plane, from a policy, compliance, procurement, governance. It all becomes a lot more simplified, because now we're just talking about what a certain group or role is allowed to access within the environment, and it's unified everywhere. Figuring out what you already own. I mentioned this earlier. This is a big one for us. The number of times we walk in and a salesperson on my team will tell me like, "Oh, this is a great opportunity. We're going to sell them this." And we get in there and kind of go through their cabinets, go through their closets. It's like, well, no, we're not actually going to sell you anything on this. We're going to help you integrate all this because you already own it. I can't tell you how many times most of the stuff that our customers have needed is already in their toolbox. It's just with another team, and that's what I was talking about with silos, making sure that everyone's integrated. I can't tell you how many times we'll be talking with a networking team and ask them a question, and they'll say, "Oh, that's a question for security." It's actually not. Everyone needs to understand what's in the environment, so everyone can architect to that and build to that and design to that. I've touched on it a couple times, but controls and policies. There's a lot of, I'm going to do that later when we talk to customers about controls and policies, where we ask them about, what's your business continuity policy? We have one. Can we see a copy of it? No, we just know that like we need to start here and get on a telephone call, and we'll go from there. But having controls and policies helps you design towards that top bullet point, or the sub-bullet point, of creating unified roles across all of your environments to protect your infrastructure. And finally, closing interoperability gaps. Going back to that story I told earlier in the presentation about a customer who thought the vendor switch was cool but couldn't write to the API. There are a lot of tools out there today that with either low code or no code, you can do the integration and you can move things forward. What's amazing is we have a financial services customer who had they had about an 18-month backlog of Ansible automation they were building for their ServiceNow environment to tie into their AWS environment to deploy service catalogs and update their CMDB. We finally got them to look at one of these low-code, no-code integrations. and they were able to collapse their entire 18-month backlog into about 6 weeks, just by uploading the Swift files for their APIs, getting everything in, and then building their entire policy for site onboarding, user onboarding into a logic that was easy for them to write governance, compliance policies around, and then write the runbooks for their service desk teams to then deploy. So, I mentioned with SIEM, it can be a beast. There's a lot of FTEs required to properly manage these things. You have all the SIEM vendors out there who say that their product's the only product that's going to reduce the noise. The only thing that's going to reduce the noise and properly tune these things out are a dedicated team of people who are going to look into the care and feeding of these platforms. Up until recently, we ran an in-house SOC for our managed services customers. And the most surprising thing was, aside from the analysts that were hunting, I had a deeper staff that was dedicated just to keeping the SIEM alive. From making sure our SANs had the capacity, that our firewalls had the bandwidth to handle all the logs coming in. It can be a very time and money intensive problem that I think a lot of customers struggle with. And a lot of people get 3/4 of the way through and don't actually do the full deployment. So it's really important that as the SIEM is being deployed, it's not just deployed and forgotten, because then we get into situations where customers don't actually know what data is going into it, don't know how to find the data when they need it. There needs to be someone who's doing the care, the feeding, the threat hunting, the alert creation, not just trusting machine learning or AI to do their SIEM analytics for them. So as long as you have a budget, having an in-house SIEM can be highly beneficial. But if you're not really willing to commit at least 1 to 2 FTEs to an in-house SIEM solution for like a large environment, you really should look at outsourcing to something else, because it won't help you to only have it for incident response analytics of how long were they in my system, right? We want to get towards having everything integrated and reporting in the moment of, all right, great. A user was socially engineered, their password was reset. We have that kind of workflow. We have those logs. Having those logs trigger an alert that makes sure that people know that something happened, versus 8 months later, 10 months later, going through the SIEM and discovering that you had all of the logs leading up to the full compromise, whether it be an exfil or a malware encryption. It can hurt. So this is what Vandus did, because we couldn't stay up with it, right? So we partnered with a third-party SOC. Actually, we partnered with a third-party MDR, where we are working with them to not only send them our logs and traffic, but also we've started moving our customers over to it, because this is what they do. This is what their dedicated jobs are. And while they are looking at multiple customers across the board, they are also looking for commonalities across the customers. So the important thing with going with these third-party solutions is that you ask questions like, can I see my data? That same customer I mentioned earlier, not only did they have their own in-house SIEM, but they also had an outsourced solution. But the outsourced solution was a black box to them. They couldn't actually get into their data. So we knew it was definitely in there, but we ended up having to work with the third-party vendor and discovered that the third-party vendor, after X number of days, only essentially keeps like the log header and everything else gets stripped. So you really want to make sure that when you are looking at these platforms that it's not a one-size-fits-all. You really need to find what fits for you and your organization. Do you need to see the logs? How long do they keep the logs? Do they keep the full log? Do you have any compliance that requires any kind of log retention or chain of custody? You have to make sure all these things are being considered. All right, so I'm just going to give you guys some quick examples for three customer examples over the last year that we've worked on, and then I'll open it up to the floor to anyone who has any questions. So we were working with a customer who's a very large e-commerce platform. They had an in-house SIEM, very large in-house SIEM, but they had a cybersecurity incident and discovered that it did not have complete data. So over the years, it was collecting some things. Some departments were following procedure to get logs in and get things properly set up and correlated, and some weren't. Finding incidents, finding threats was taking a really, really long time for them. So we worked with them to actually integrate all of their logs into the platform, but then we actually layered on SOAR on top of that and started to work with them to leverage the third-party APIs and the integration of making sure that all those three circles in the 047 chart I showed you before were communicating with each other. And what we actually discovered working with them was that by getting all of their logs into one place, by getting their SIEM tuned for them, integrating a SOAR platform into the SIEM, and integrating the SOAR platform with the APIs of all of their essentially their defense platforms, we were able to drop their mean time to resolution from hours or days to minutes. And they saw a huge gain in that. So they had the dedicated team to deal with it. They just, it's like when you walk into a network closet and someone hasn't been doing wire management for 20 years. That's what your logs can look like if you aren't doing like active cleanup and making sure that things are being sorted, correlated, and stored the way they should be. All right, so during COVID, one of our customers, a regional bank that rapidly expanded because they were processing the small business loans and everything else. They started to grow and grow and grow. But one of the things that they talked about in the lunch with us was that they don't even know where to look when things go wrong because they just are getting alerts from everywhere. So we went in and we looked at their SIEM. They had 13,000 default rules enabled. And they were just pumping everything in. They had no dashboards. They had actually created no structure to it. So one of the things we did was brought in a third-party MDR and sat down with them and said, here's what we're going to do for you. We're going to bring in an MDR that does endpoint. They do the logging. We're going to pipe everything in and start to get you on a path to being in a better space. And one of the things that almost immediately came out was they didn't even know about this. They had a problem with their endpoints. Of their fleet of laptops that they had been deploying to work from home users over the course of COVID, and then after everyone came back to the office, 30% of them were in compliance decay, meaning they didn't have updated GPOs, they didn't have updated software, they didn't have updated endpoint protection. It could be any of those things. Anything that falls under that compliance governance realms of how are we controlling our machines. So within a month, they were able to come into full compliance and have their entire organization fully compliant from the endpoint standpoint. So, you know, it's not a one size fits all, but in this case, going to a third-party hosted MDR worked for them. Finally, you know, we work with a multinational manufacturing company, and one of the big issues that they have had for a long time is in regards to their physical networks. They considered everything to be trusted, and it's not that they wanted to be trusted; it's that they were too scared to actually change it. And they weren't sure what they were going to affect. So what we did here was we integrated their switching platforms, their firewalls, their MDMs, because they do have multiple, as well as their endpoint protection together to start making dynamic decisions about what was allowed on the network. So we started there, right? We started with the simple stuff. The compliance decay of an endpoint. And then from there, we went into what we talked about in that 047 slide of integrating it all together. Role-based decisions for the who, what, where, when, and why, and unifying it to a standardized policy so that no matter the device, no matter the user, their experience was the same from whatever location they were accessing it from. And from there, we were able to help them fully actually lock down all of their manufacturing facilities, as well as, you know, helping them provide the exact same experience for their users that are working from home, working from the plants, working from their regional headquarters or distribution sites. And in doing that, they now have a single run book for their service desk team to look at in terms of troubleshooting, understanding for their employees and how that employee should be accessing the network. So, takeaways from today. So decreasing complexity while increasing value, right? So it's, over the years, our networks, our security policies have become wildly complex. By standardizing in you know, all of your areas, whether it be work from home, the office, the data center, and creating true zero trust networking, you're able to decrease the complexity, increase the value, and often you'll find that you're actually going to increase performance as well. If you don't have the staffing budget to handle integrating multiple point products, to be fully integrated with each other so that they're sharing real-time telemetry and intelligence with each other and taking actions to protect your environment, whether it be on-premise, in the cloud, or work from home, then honestly, cybersecurity mesh architecture is the framework for you. And that is because you're going to go to a single pane of glass, single vendor, and you'll be able to more easily integrate and maintain your ecosystem. Integration is not just doing lift and shift code deployments. We see that a lot with customers. Really, like every time you're going to do an integration with a third party or even with your teams internally, visibility and automation should be concepts that are always in the front of your mind. Human error made up for I don't even remember the number off of it. I just saw it in the Verizon report this morning too. I think it was like 12%. Like 12% of breaches were caused by human error. So focusing on integration where you have visibility and automation and you're taking the human element out of it and you're really focusing on policy-driven design, will get you to a place where you're removing the human element from it, but also simplifying your ecosystem as you go. And finally, you're not alone. Talk to others, find out what they're doing. Feel free to contact myself, any of my peers in the room. We have Jeff in the corner and Tom was here. He actually is the ex-coworker of mine who he and I brainstormed 047 originally. But we see this in a lot of places. We see this across a lot of verticals. Honestly, I've not seen anyone who does this perfectly. I've even seen companies think they do it perfectly, and we run automated pen testing platforms against them, and it comes out that there's some big hole that they didn't see it. So always pen test. Like anyone who thinks that they don't need to pen test because they're not big enough or they're not protecting enough, do that as well. So with that, I'll open it up. I know I was kind of all over the place, but if anyone has any questions, go for it. Yeah.
So for an org that has everything you talked about, right? Traditional network, work from home, all that, and then in addition, a consumer portal for logins. Do you recommend all of that integrates so into one pane?
Consumer portal as in a customer-facing website?
Yeah.
So I certainly think the logs from the customer-facing website should be going to that single pane of glass. From the standpoint of the application itself, I mean, there's some tooling that will work in that. If you're piping your application logs, all your performance logs into the same place as your security logs and network logs, you can do some really great correlation across that to really see, that's often the early driver. Especially with, this year the big ones were, social engineering, email. The next biggest vector was web applications, right? So DDoSing the web application to break it down. But usually getting into the web application, compromising some kind of credential, and then using that credential to find more credentials, often through, believe it or not, email. And people are still emailing passwords around, thinking that their email infrastructure is safe. But yeah, I mean, look, where you can, identity, get your customer portals integrated with identity, like federated identity, I highly recommend. That way you're going more towards a unified login experience there, but it also unifies your logs. So you're getting that same thing from your IDP. Yep.
When it comes to this interoperability, are vendors trying to publish open standards for this interoperating with each other, or is it more
Honestly, unfortunately, the answer is it depends on the vendor. You have some vendors that are pushing very hard to create third-party integrations, where not only are they publishing their own open APIs, but they're also integrating other vendors into them so that they can go bidirectional. And then you have vendors who, they want to get there, but they might be too small. What we're seeing is a lot of the point products they don't have the ability to really grow it out, so they're essentially, they fall into that bucket of like, here's our API, good luck. And that's really where the no-code, low-code solutions come in, where you can, if you don't have the time to integrate that API, you might be able to just, stitch it together yourself using the APIs. Yep. Yeah, I do. Those are always the tough one, and of course those are always the most politically challenged, because there's always some stakeholder that is holding on to it. Look, often we start to counsel people out of that island product or that's when I refer to point products, that's what I'm referring to as point products. Anything that has manual integrations or manual actions required, it doesn't end up being sustainable, especially with the pace at which the threat landscape is growing. You can't have something where you're expecting a manual process of like someone logging in, checking the logs, someone logging in, updating, the users or decommissioning a user. Like we are at a point in like our phase in technology where we shouldn't be doing manual anything if we can avoid it. It's really figuring out how we solve to get that integrated. So if it has an API, can it be integrated into a low-code, no-code solution? Or is it something that, like, why is it there? Like why are we using a product that is a point product that's all manual? Like is that really helping the business? What are the solutions that can replace it? How do we migrate it off, or how do we migrate it into something that has it might have most of the functions but not all of the functions. Does that make sense? Anyone else? All right. Thank you all very much.